resolved issues that are existing historically, right? I'm an anchor baby myself. The only reason I'm here is because of the 1898, Supreme Court ruling with Wong Kim Ark saying that someone born on American soil would qualify by the 14th Amendment to be an American citizen, right? Now, I think what's been pointed out so beautifully is that our histories are intertwined, right? Intertwined generationally, but also intertwined with all of the other Asian American API groups, and also intertwined with various kinds of groups that have been othered and declared foreign in the US context especially. So we don't have a lot of time left, but I thought it would be great to maybe think about this generational question a little bit. And think about, for example, what would Wong Chin-fu be doing today and the next generations to come? A lot of you, I know, have children, and your children have children. So we're really here even talking about at least 7 generations here, okay? And we know people who, in terms of our grandparents, our parents, maybe our great-grandparents, 4 generations back, and we can think now more about 4 generations ahead. So I think the question I have for the panel is to think about that question about what generation, what are you trying to do, what do you think we have to do in terms of the future generations? I know what each of you are doing now is with that in mind, but I also just want to add a time depth question because when we first started at the New York Chinatown History Project talking about Wong Chin-fu, it was really after I had been aware of Him Mark Lai, who I think of as my mentor out in California, who had published just a very simple publication. It was just published very simply. It was a stapled orange cover about Chinese in America. And he was the person I had first read that had mentioned Wong Chin-fu. So we're talking about generations now that has taken Wong Chin-fu to now be performed, to be remembered, and to have Scott Seligman write this book, which I encourage you to take a look at. But it takes so long, right? It takes so long. So this question of generational memory is critical. And I think in some ways that's what these community papers are also doing, right? So maybe, Richard, I could just ask you how you first learned about Wong Chin-fu, and then why did you decide to devote so much of your time and energy, which I really appreciate. I mean, I think we all appreciate the fact, because you're keeping his spirit alive in a way for so many people, and I'm hoping in some ways you're able to do it even more, although I'm sure you're it's working, you're working on a film, you've done this comic book. Can you just tell us a little bit about how you first came upon him and why you decided to spend so much time about him?
Hi. I discovered Wong Chin-fu by accident. I'm an actor. I was sent by my agent to do a voiceover job. It turned out to be Bill Moyer's Becoming American documentary series, The Chinese Experience, and I was assigned Wong Chin-fu. And I was like, when I saw the excerpt, I was like, what? how could we not know this guy? And I decided I would research him, and I thought that if only there was a film set in the Gilded Age with this Chinese-American romantic leading man, and it's commercially successful, wow. What would it do to all those stereotypes? And
he was a handsome dude too.
Yeah, and so I told the producer actually, and said, wait till this documentary is out, as if it could be done just like that. So I tried to write my first screenplay, and I thought, oh God, this is too difficult. I don't know how to get a film produced, so let me write a play first. I was very, very frustrated because there wasn't much written on him that I could find. I thought I would have to fictionalize, definitely, but as a Reuters journalist, I insisted on being as authentic as possible, even though I would be fictionalizing it. But in the end, by 2013, Scott Seligman had written this book, and I also found Wang Qingfu's great-great-grandson in Beijing. And I visited him in August 2014. I was forced to write my first email in Chinese. Very difficult. And then finally the play was produced in 2022 by Pan Asian Rep. And after that, through a mutual friend, I got to know Doug, who suggested we do a documentary because he used to produce documentaries for History Channel and other places. And I thought, yeah, why not, now that we have all the details about Wang. Meanwhile, I got a grant to do a short film about him, and then an anonymous sponsor turned out to be San Francisco State University, wanted to support this project, and I went there and I spoke as Wang Qingfu, and they proposed that we do this comic, which took a year of almost weekly meetings. I'm thinking now maybe my next, so it became the Citizen Wong project instead of just Citizen Wong the play. And I think the next project might be an animated TV series.
Frank, we've known each other for a while now, and I know you came out of Detroit, and you know, you've played a very important role, you know, teaching at Black University also, and that being in Detroit, of course, you're dealing with dramatic issues of the rebellions, of also the role of Chinese in that city, and the difficult kinds of issues that were being faced, you know, cross-culturally. And this has been brought up a number of times, and I think it's such an important issue. So maybe you could talk about a little bit about that and why Wang Qingfu in some ways is important in kind of thinking about these kinds of questions in terms of that kind of experience.
Sure. So, you know, when I was a kid growing up, and I'm ashamed to admit this now, I was embarrassed of my parents right now. Actually, all teenagers are embarrassed. Right? So that's not a shocking confession, but I think for the first American-born generation, there's something different in the sense that you grow up with an awkward role reversal, right? You're the interpreter for your family.
Yeah.
And, you know, my parents, when we watched television sitcoms in the 1970s, I'm 59 this year, but you wouldn't know because I'm Asian. So when we watched TV, they didn't always laugh at the right time, right? And there was stuff that they sort of didn't get, and it was only much later that I realized, no, they understood. So when I would go home from school and say there was, you know, racist bullying on the playground, now I wouldn't have put it in those terms, right? But the teasing and taunting, we all know, you know, do you eat dogs? Are your parents communists? How can you see with eyes like that? You know, Ching Chong, you know, stuff like that. But my parents would say to me, try harder to fit in. And I thought they were blaming me, right? But no, they were blaming themselves, because what I didn't know as a kid is they faced all of that too. The sophisticated adult version at the workplace or out shopping or trying to get a mortgage to buy a house. But they figured it was because they had accents. Now, everyone has an accent. I have a Detroit accent, right? Although sometimes people have said to me, oh, wow, that's quite a Chinese accent you have. Yeah, no, you know, that's, linguists will tell you that's a visual cue, because on the telephone, I sound like, you know, an old white guy, maybe an old black guy, right? But visually, people perceive something. Anyway, my parents blamed themselves. They figured it was because they didn't laugh at the right time when we watched Happy Days, that they had brought this type of bias on the family, because they believed in the proverbial American dream, right? And they didn't have language of civil rights because they spoke another language, and I was just a kid, so we didn't understand that there was something around us that wasn't their fault, it wasn't my fault, it's discrimination, right? It's bigotry. And it was the Chin case that made me understand that, so I won't go over everything.
The Vincent Chin case.
Yeah. Other than, so I didn't know him, I was a decade younger, but I knew when I heard about it, that could have been my uncle, my cousin, could have been me, right? And then suddenly I realized that it was all on a spectrum, right? That what happened to him was the most extreme version of the stuff that my family saw as well, right? And in the wrong place, the wrong time, you encounter some guys who are drunk, who feel the pinch of economic anxiety as if you don't. And the same thing could happen, right? So, like a lot of folks who went out, and I'll stop in a moment. When I was young in the 70s in the Midwest in Detroit, I was dedicated to doing something which is, I realize, futile, right? Which is to assimilate. This is way before anyone talked about diversity. Diversity was not a word in use. Multiculturalism wasn't a word in use. Nobody, even Asian immigrants, talked really about Asian Americans, right? So I'll give you an example from language, and I'll bet this is true of some of you in this room. At the dinner table, when my parents spoke about people around us, neighbors, coworkers, they spoke of white people as Americans, and they spoke about black people as black people, right? So blacks weren't Americans either, but neither were they, and neither were my brothers, right? So my brothers and I, we were very much dedicated to this project, which we were told was what we had to do, which was assimilate. So my mother would spend all afternoon making a great Chinese meal with a steamed whole fish and everything. We would demand hamburgers, hot dogs, pizza, right? In this vain notion that if we just ate the same food, right, we would be accepted. And so that's what all of this is about. I'll just end by saying there is something that I want to raise here among friends, which is about generations and generational time. You mentioned authoritarianism. There is something that I worry about. I'm not going to assume anything about anyone in this room, who you voted for, what your politics are, how you like that. But it is that every one of us in this room has a cousin. And I ask you to think of who this person is, who, on immigration, on whatever the issue is, actually is aligned with authoritarian voices, whether here or, so you can think of a cousin like that? And I think, yeah, right? And I just want to mention that because as much as there is conflict that we might face from others within our own families, there are some folks who think of us as, you're too liberal, or whatever it is, however they think of you, right? And they would make choices which, entirely aside from ideals, one of the things that I want to say to them is, this is a bad idea for you. So even if you don't care about the same principles I care about, you're going to regret the way you cast your ballot, these choices you made. This is not going to work out well for you, So I just want to raise that as something for us to think about.
Yeah, thank you. Kavita, you've spoken a lot about solidarities across API groups, but also you're talking about cross-racial, cross-cultural, whatever we want to call it, solidarities and tolerance, I want to know if you've had a chance to see the Wilfredo Lam show at the moment, okay? Have anybody seen that exhibit? Wilfredo Lam is Afro-Cuban mom, right? Chinese dad, And this is really during the period in which, of course, in Cuba, enslavement had happened. Also Chinese contract laborers in China, in Cuba for many years. And in fact, Afro-Cuban and Chinese rebels actually emerged in various kinds of efforts to try to liberate themselves from really the colonial system that was there. An amazing show, but at the same time, the Museum of Modern Art has generally shown, they bought his most important painting, The Jungle, but put it by the coat room. Okay, it's something that John Yao has talked about for many decades. And finally, they have a major retrospective. But he's oftentimes still interpreted as kind of a third-rate Picasso. So maybe, so I don't know if you have anything to say about Lao, I'm not asking for that, but I think this question of South-to-South solidarity, but also the history of that is something that we tend not to know. So our reference is so much to the United States, but you're also talking about diasporas.
Yeah.
And the diasporas are much more complex, and you're kind of alluding to that in some ways. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I think, just to go to your point about generations, so I have a 14-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old who's joined us today, on the verge of 10. Big comic book fan.
Krishna.
Krishna, so I don't know if you guys know this, but Krishna means black, and his middle name is my father's name, who passed away, so his name is Raj, Krishna Raj, which means Black King, which we thought was nice. But yeah, so, we talk about this a lot. I am now on the board of an organization called the Blindian Project, and it's really looking, it grew out of this Instagram account that was talking about love stories between Black and South Asian people. And we started talking about this, the founders and I, and we realized that, when we have always been treated like we're the outsiders in our community, or the so-called black sheep or white sheep, whatever it is, I don't like to use that term, but the outsiders in our communities. But if you think about our experience under British imperialism, Black people and South Asian people have been displaced together for centuries. So we're actually the majority community, the Blindians. And so, or the the Blasians, for want of a better word. It sounds awful, that sounds like ablation. But I was thinking what's so interesting about having a teenage daughter now is I remember growing up with my parents, and I'm thinking about your stories, what you were talking about, from the land of Grace Lee Boggs, talking about solidarity. Just how I was looking forward to having children of my own in the United States and being able to raise them as an American, raising an American child. But in this generation, they are all growing up in a new country, which is the digital country. So I feel like we don't speak the same language. I feel like I don't know how to navigate their reality. I feel like I don't know what the future holds for them or how to keep them safe. So I feel now so much more solidarity with my mother, who, is a very complicated lady, who, has told me many times in my childhood that I'm not actually Indian. And I was like, no, I'm not, because you brought me here. It's not, I'm sorry. That's the reality. I was born and raised here. But yeah, I think about this generational issue a lot, and I think a lot about, the kind of multiculturalism and solidarity within our communities. Just American immigration policy is rooted in supremacy and imperialism, right? So we who are selected to come here as immigrants, we come from a place of privilege. So the majority of us who came here as Indian Americans, we came from upper caste backgrounds, we came with a certain amount of social capital. There's this big story about how all these Indian men like to say, oh, I came here with $5 in my pocket. My father used to tell me that. I came here with $7 in my pocket. But he spoke English, he came here with legal status, he was invited to do a master's degree, and he was upper caste. And he immigrated to North Carolina in 1971, which is where SNCC was founded. And at the same time that the lunch counter protests were going on, he was graduating from his graduate program as valedictorian and was not permitted access into the whites-only country club where they were having the celebration. But they did not think that he would count because he wasn't actually black. And he didn't feel the pain of it because he had supremacy in his own body and didn't feel like he was actually a victim in this country, right? We look back at the people who are telling the stories of South Asians in this country, the history of South Asians in this country, and over again, the names that you see are upper caste scholars who will talk about merchants from the 17th century, or businessmen or traders. But recently, or over the summer, Maryland and Virginia, I just learned this from an anthropologist earlier this year, Maryland and Virginia digitized their slavery archives, and on those archives you see a number of names that are Indian and South Asian, because the British Empire stress tested the concept of race in India under the British Raj. Little Black Sambo is Indian, and a lot of people don't realize that. So I think what we need to do is kind of explore colorism, casteism, racism within our communities so that we can better understand how we have internalized those systems, how we map caste onto race in the United States, and how we perceive status in ways that are not ours, how the colonial and imperial legacy continues to affect us. And I say this even in a room full of a number of Chinese Americans who were not colonized by the United States thanks to the Boxer Rebellion and various other uprisings, but have faced innumerable, the Opium Wars, colonial efforts to kind of crack open and violate the culture and to change the culture and transform the culture. And immigration, I think of to the United States, is very much a function of U.S. imperialism in the Asia-Pacific region. So I think about, when we talk about future generations, I feel better equipped growing up in an immigrant household to help my children navigate kind of a mysterious future, because I saw how my parents helped me navigate a mysterious future. I am willing, because I ended up marrying into the Black community, I am willing now to challenge caste supremacy and not inculcate my children with supremacy that maybe they don't need. Maybe they need to feel better solidarity with the oppressed people in India, which is a very dehumanizing place. So we know how this works. Our countries are huge, people don't always have rights there, but our generations, our young people, are the ones who are founding our community news now, our feminist news and progressive news.
So thank you very much for that. We're going to turn it to the audience very soon, so just think of a question you may want to ask. I think we can stay a little longer, right? Okay, good. Okay.